Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to this virtual event from Majors and Quinn. My name is Steph. I'm a bookseller and events associate here. For those who don't know, Majors and Quinn is an independent bookstore in uptown Minneapolis, Minnesota. If it is your first time viewing one of our virtual events, welcome. We're so glad to have you. And if you're coming back for, a second, a third, however many virtual events, welcome back. Thank you for your continued support of our program here. Tonight, I am really thrilled to introduce a series of poets. We have 4 lovely women who are joining us this evening. If you're interested in purchasing a copy of any of their books of poetry or any of their previous works, head on over to majorsandquinn.com or give us a call. I will be posting a link and our phone number in the comments. And speaking of comments, please check in there. Tell us where you're tuning in from. And also, if you have any questions for any of the poets throughout the event, put them in the comments. At the end, we'll have time for a quick little Q&A and time for a chat. So put your comments there and we'll get to them, hopefully. All right, so with all of that kind of bookkeeping out of the way, I am thrilled to introduce our first poet of the evening. Jessica Cuello is the author of Liar, selected by Dorianne Lowe for the 2020 Barrow Street Poetry Prize. Her manuscript of epistolary poems in the voice of Mary Shelley, Yours Creature, is forthcoming from Jackleg Press in 2023. So Jessica, it is all you. Thanks.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here tonight and read with Alina, Chloe, and Shannon. I'll be reading from my book, Liar. And I'm just going to start. Limbo. I draw an eye on my notebook, a swirl of ink. I'm not sure whose, but it sees me when my brother can't. He lives with us, but died somewhere back in childhood. He won't say how. His limbs move well enough to walk to school and back. I've seen his vacant eye, seen him in the hallway in his same sweatshirt. He won't pronounce my name. He skips the I. He shuts his door. We once were close, walked hand in hand. Pre-language, we shared a bed. My notebook eye is more alive than he. Grain of paper, welt of ink. It sees more than a dead boy. And because he does alive things, like sleep and eat, I can't mourn. My babysitter, Karen B., who was sent to Willard Asylum. There are only 2 photos of me as a child. She took them. She had no child. She had cool cigarettes and a job at the drugstore. She gave me the Crayola box with the built-in sharpener. 400 suitcases were stored in the attic of Willard Asylum for the chronic insane. She joined her twin brother there. She wore her black hair down. A child could admire it. She bought me an Easter basket, a stuffed rabbit whose fur rubbed off. She walked everywhere. She painted circles of blush on her cheeks. Loony, people said so. I mean, grown-ups who saw signs, who passed her on our street before she started to call and say, remember. On the phone, she said, remember the date we killed her brother, forgetting he'd been committed. I took her hand and tagged along like an animal. She was perfect to a child. In 1995, when the asylum closed, an artist took photos of the 400 suitcases. The photos were put online, the contents laid out respectfully. In the open suitcases, belts, pocket knives, Lone Ranger cards, keys, ribbons, shoe polish, mirrors, pills, a fountain pen, bottle of glycerin, a zither, kit of needles, bread ration card, the Gospel of John, a letter. Each suitcase had a name: Lena C., Lillian L., Mary T., Gloria P., Cassie M., Francis T., Marion R., Catherine S., Dimitri Z., Ruby C., Anthony C., FJL, Viola G., Alice T., Carrie L., Karen B., remember. I nod when the school's visiting doctor asks if I eat 3 meals a day. In my family, you recreate invisible and freeze like a rabbit. You do not cry. God can read your mind. In my family, you lie in the snow and dream how your birth happened. The rough edge of the tabletop, the knuckles of the artist's father, who paints all night in a disease, then leaves and leaves. No one confesses anything. The black and blue mother scrapes herself together, and into the world comes a baby with her mouth open. In my family, you tame your needs. You bite but don't chew the winter leaves. You drink milk white snow from your mittens. And I'm just going to read 2 more. Laundromat with single mother. This is a pantoum, so it's repetitive. We put our dirty clothes in trash bags and took a cab to the laundromat where I gave her the cold shoulder. The windows were floor to ceiling glass. We took a cab to the laundromat where outsiders could see my cold mother through the floor to ceiling glass, getting us clean and see how we got mothered. Twice she birthed herself in us. She got us clean, a young mother who folded each piece of cloth. Twice she gave birth. Her clothes and ours touched her hands. She folded each piece. I buried my face in the warm clothes that touched her hands. I was the youngest child. I buried my face in the clothes. I was critic and girl, the youngest child. She stacked the piles in trash bags, ordered her critic and girl to keep an eye out for the cab. She carried out the trash bags when it was time to go, and we watched for the cab. I was a silent cold shoulder. The cab honked at us to hurry, and she grabbed my cold shoulder in silence, like it was her own limb. That shirt makes you a whore because it's black. I paid for the whore shirt with my own money, bought it at the mall. It was buttoned down and satin to the touch. Who was this whore that had never kissed anyone, not even her mother, who would not menstruate until she was old enough to leave home, until she had tasted fat, the pleasure of its depth? Whoreness must have started at the sleepovers when we played hooker. We stripped for each other. No, whoreness started younger, at 3, at 2, at birth, in the womb, whoring with balled fists and floating in the whore sea. When the 11-year-olds played streetwalker, I was the best. What did the best mean? It meant no smile. It was shame in girl form, which was shame's first form. It meant relinquish the body. It meant do not eat in front of others. Do not pee in public bathrooms, not even school. It was the body in plain sight, but hidden. The girl's small cocked hip in the room of girls. Thank you so much for listening. It's my pleasure to introduce the next poet, Chloe Martinez. Chloe Martinez is a poet and scholar of South Asian religions. She is the author of the collection 10,000 Selves, out from WordWorks Press, which is a press I also share with Chloe, and the chapbook Corner Shrine Backbone from Backbone Press. Her poems have appeared in Plowshares, Prairie Schooner, Shenandoah, Beloit Poetry Journal, and elsewhere. She works at Claremont McKenna College. Welcome, Chloe.
Thank you so much, Jessica. So happy to be pressmates with you and so happy to be here with you all. And I can't, that was such a beautiful reading. Those poems are really incredible, and I'm jealous of everybody who can make comments in the comments because we readers, we can see you in the comments. Hi, everybody. But we can't comment in there and say that poem, the part where you drink the snow from the mittens. Ah, I love it. I'm going to read a couple poems from my collection, 10,000 Selves. Here it is. It's got a horse made of women, and it's certainly about women's experience. It's about motherhood and chaos, and trying to make a little bit of progress through that chaos, whatever you think progress might mean. One of the things I'm thinking about in this book is definitely spiritual progress. Okay, I'm going to read a couple from this one, and then I might read one or two new poems also. I'm going to just start with one of the poems in the book, which is called Mandala of the Pile of Papers on the Dining Room Table. And there are a bunch of poems in this collection that are called mandalas and that are about mandala, meaning some kind of a circle or map that you're trying to make your way through to get somewhere, figure something out. Mandala of the Pile of Papers on the Dining Room Table. Star of pain in your neck. Turn it side to side, it glows in the dark, all the same. Your poster of the Golden Temple keeps falling down over your desk, and the latest baby announcement watches you severely from the top of the pile. Send the gift already, says the baby. So new it hasn't yet learned how to smile. What is the proper order? How to master your materials? Annual reminder, protect yourself from the flu, and a catalog full of things you hate and also want. You try to imagine spending thousands on the Lombok bed. You stare at its hand-carved filigree imported perhaps from its namesake island in Indonesia, site of a recent earthquake, death toll 20. Made in China, more likely. The enormous headboard resembles a flower mandala, but, I kid you not, painted white, and no illusory demons wait here for the boho chic sleeper to encounter in dreams or visions. There will be no battle against the senses, no progress from the simple periphery to the inner circle, which contains, in some traditions, the most fearsome opponents. Some dangerously beautiful, others just plain dangerous. The catalog bedroom is light-filled, tidy. A single houseplant hangs from an exposed beam, and a small green bottle of San Pellegrino rests by the bedside. A room you float into, unencumbered by karma, by want, by messy piles of paper, mandala, a universe map, at its center, enlightenment, which is to say, freedom from causing harm. Move through it by touch, by starlight. Demons may appear. Persevere. Don't look them in the eye. I did a reading in person for the first time the other day, and my friend Cynthia, who's here, brought me flowers. So I'm going to read this poem about flower arrangements. It's called Arrangements. Because the lilies aren't ready to bloom, the women of the wedding party fan out across the reception hall, lean close to each cluster of green, and with 2 fingers unlock the petals from one another. Nudge them apart enough to let light slip in. Flowers don't know what moves them. They find themselves falling open, one after another, imperceptibly slow explosion. Awake, awake, they cry silently. All around them, the silverware in formation, the wide open faces of plates, expectant white expanses of tablecloth. Quiet now, for the women have gone to pin white jasmine in their hair, and the men pace on the lawn in Sunday suits, squinting upwards, reading the sky for signs of rain. I'm gonna read another mandala poem, and this is one that is stolen from a Girl Scout field trip. A lot of the poems in this book were written in the corners of doing mom stuff, including accompanying my daughter on a lot of Girl Scout events. Mandala of the Nature Center sleepover. There is pizza. The fish that ignored us during the day now seem to take an interest. Maybe we imagine it. The seahorses are holding hands with their curly tails. There is one small octopus asleep in a rock cave, eye closed, mysterious, heart engine pumping visibly. There is a craft project, a scavenger hunt. The children and their adults wander back and forth, the moray eel opening and shutting his mouth in a terrifying corner, and then we notice the octopus has awakened. She curls and uncurls, tentacle cakewalks across the glass wall, then rockets herself through the water. And the way she moves doesn't say escape or hunger, though once we see her false eye spots glow bright blue as if, her label says, under threat. But that color fades and she goes on far beyond easy explanations, a dance of being alive in a body, a dance of the body alive. The octopus is unlike us. The octopus is more like us than we can explain. What I mean is the multiplicity of her suction cups unimaginable, and yet right here before our eyes, the truth, beauty. We stand in a semicircle before her tank, watching for as long as the octopus chooses to move us. We stay quite still, fallen silent, seen. Gonna just read one more from this book and then something newer. Gonna read the last poem in the book, which is kind of co-written with my younger daughter, who's 6 now. Maybe she was 4 when this was written. And it's called Volcano. No mountaintop, no forest retreat, no cave, no lions bearing witness. You were born into this body, not by accident. If you're going to have a revelation, let it be here on the living room floor with Safia, who has gotten a piece of paper and with her blue safety scissors cuts out a door in the shape of a volcano. She says, I'm going to make the volcano disappear. No holy orders, no bodhisattva vow, no ascetic regimen. She opens the door. I've been working on new poems during the pandemic, which are all about museums and artworks and how much I miss museums. I've been back to one maybe since things started to open up. But my parents are both painters. I grew up going to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York every chance we could get, and looking at art and thinking about it. And I've been thinking about that as well. So Shannon, I'm also glad to be in a reading with you. Your book is also so much in conversation with art and artworks. This poem is about a teeny tiny little terracotta plaque that's in the Met, that's from North India, pre-modern, and it's called Woman Dancing. I don't know her name. Call her fist in the air. Call her dancing so hard she might fall. Call her doesn't care. The guy with the vina is playing all out. You can tell by the way his sculpted hand almost blurs, and the two of them making their little terracotta square sweat and rattle. They're busting out of the frame, and the whole thing might just fall down or burst into flame. I don't know her name, but call her specific real woman in the year 57 BCE. I can't hear the music. Don't know if she danced as a queen, as one caption claims, or if she went home hungry after the music stopped. Washed the pots, thought about giving it all up, maybe going monastic for a while. I go to the foot of a tree and think, ah, happiness, writes the nun in the Therigatha. But that was ancient history. By the time woman dancing moved like pure human joy, her ornaments rattling or shining in the light. Was it night? What could it have been but the moon? Look at her eyes, even behind this plexiglass in the quiet spotlight of distant, dusty gallery number 253, like your own in the photo you found at the back of a drawer, the one from your best, worst, youngest year. They're shining. There's a distant fire in there. Thank you. I want to now introduce our next reader. Alina Stefanescu was born in Romania and lives in Birmingham, Alabama. Recent books include a creative nonfiction chapbook, Ribbled, from Bull City Press's Amazing Inch series, and Door, which won the Wandering Angus Press Prize. Her debut fiction collection, Every Mask I Tried On, won the Bright Horse Books Prize. She serves as poetry editor for several journals, reviewer and critic for others, and co-director of PEN America Birmingham. And I've only met her virtually, but even seeing online how incredibly productive and thoughtful and engaged with poetry all the time she is, I'm so happy to be reading here with her today. Alina.
Thank you so much, Chloe. It was amazing hearing you and hearing Jessica. And it's amazing being here in this space tonight. I want to start by just laying my thoughts with the people in Ukraine and the Ukrainian diaspora. It's I don't know, it's very sad. The book that I'm reading from tonight, it's very difficult to fathom, but also very just not surprising at all. So Dor is what I'm reading from, and Dor is a book about a Romanian word for longing or missing, for a part that's missing, and Romanians like to argue that it's untranslatable. I don't believe anything's untranslatable. I think that leads to like nationalist exclusivism, and I think those ideas are dangerous. But so I wrote a book about it because it's also about losing my mother and my motherland and growing up in the Romanian Republic of Alabama. So you might hear some references to things that sound strange, like, for example, people who are living in a really tiny place with almost nothing and they think it's a luxury. My parents were always like, it's so luxe. They called everything luxe in the US because it was really just a state of Ceausescu. Everyone was poor. And so I'm going to start, I think, with a poem to my grandmother, Tuika, who died when I was pregnant with my son. And I was not married, and I had no intention of marrying the father, and I did not. And so this is for her, Tuika. It's called I Say Thread. The only grandmother I ever met wore the same emerald silk dress to all holiday meals. Over a wingspan of decades, I grew familiar with the green and black spirals swirling around her eminently foreign body. I say Romanian because that's what she admired when happening upon herself in the faux wood mirror of her Alabama apartment. I say luxury condo because that's what she called it. I say family when I mean mirroring. I say silk because her eyes ran over these teenaging shoulders, their tension. Later, she took the dress back to Romania. I say infinite because she never returned. The last time I kissed her, she wore that dress in a casket, in a chapel where all lids propped open. I say silence because her lips were stitched shut. I say bunica because that is the word for a woman sewn into a dress that loved me. I say loving because it is what's left, and forever is too much. Women in my family die pretty young, so I've always been very aware of that. And I'm going to read one now that's, I guess, an ekphrasis after Eugene Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People. The bulb beneath the bridge is broken. It hangs from a pole, unfixed, unresolved, ribald as foreplay French. When I say never mistake a poem for an etude, I mean depravity wears rain boots in April. I mean I found a toy accordion, but prayers still can't shorten the accident's life or seam the scar's rotten memory. We remember, for money, the lips of the fathers, the lies of the sons, the cold lache of marble counters under my palm, the knife opening the eyes of leaks. A man without a home or a family knows the rich lie of our liberalism. I share this wine freely with friends, but the mouth wants chocolate. The mouth wants bayonet and bonnet, bodice fallen to the waist. I wish I could comment too. I was thinking about that earlier. I had so many times that I wanted to comment when people were reading. This book is about family secrets, and I was named after my grandmother, Alina, and I was named after her because she died when my mom was pregnant with me. And she died because my grandfather made a promise that he would give her too much morphine when she no longer recognized herself. And he took her to their favorite place and did that without consulting her daughters. And my parents defected. They started hatching their plans and all of that. So there's a very complicated aspect to them leaving Romania, to my name, to what I carry in my blood. And so a lot of these poems kind of, I guess, speak to that too. And Apologia is one that I want to read for I guess, Roe v. Wade in a sense, but also for the many, many Romanian women who died from illegal abortions in Romania, and for those who have been asked to feel apologetic for their abortions in the US, those who have been asked to repent of them. So Apologia is a sort of not really an apology in the Latin, in what the Latin rhetoric means. At 22, I disappeared for a minute. I did not respond when you called me. I wanted the death Alabama didn't offer. I did not want the local D and C option. I refused the twilight sedation, the succor of a specialist doing the deed for me. I have no excuse for what I needed to be. Guilty. After visiting a former lover in Manhattan, I went to Liberty Clinic, swallowed the first pill, its origins French as the famous green statue. I used Mountain Dew to swallow the final pill on the train for Coney Island. I say Coney when I mean destination, the termination of pregnancy, the train ending in a carnival apart. The gulls witnessed everything. I stood on the boardwalk, marveling, dumbstruck by dizziness, as something left this body, its warmth flooding my jeans. My hands shook like toy airplanes. No doula or doctor or nurse or friend intervened. No expert stood between my breath and the sky, my breath and the clouds clotting, my breath and the unwanted baby, my life and the blood on my hands, the certain solace, a choice I made with myself. I did it all. I did everything. I wore the silver mermaid necklace for years, a souvenir. I think one more. It's so hard to know what to read. I never know what to read. So I'm going to read, I guess, I should read one for my mom, to be fair. So yeah, I'll read one for my mom. This is Revisiting the Romanian Republic of Alabama. So we spoke Romanian at home, but you couldn't really speak Romanian out because it was weird being from Romania. People thought you were, some of the poems in here about how people assumed we were communists or people assumed we were something else. You're always kind of what someone else makes of you, and you can't argue with it because you just want to get citizenship. You know, you want to keep your green card. You don't want to end up getting in trouble in any way. We were warned again and again as kids. Our lives were very much do not get any tickets, draw any attention to us. So that's sort of because they lost their passports when they fled. So they were my parents were stateless. So Romanian Republic of Alabama is where I grew up. And when my mom died, that disappeared. Revisiting the Romanian Republic of Alabama. I've returned for the letter you must have written to absolve all serial killer cabbages in my dreams. Living with your death is a nightmare I can't evidence without you. Did you teach me to build a country I've forgotten? My husband hates rolling sarmale alone. This whole scene is raw kitsch and untenable. Take the broken bottle blonde in the mirror, a long trail of ashes climbing into her mouth. Take the kids who call this doll mama. Ladle them lentils. Things have changed since I stomped through the unofficial republic of diacritic azaleas in combat boots and all black. I kept my face like a Modigliani until you fed me cobbler and said, "Mutzva grij, sweetie. Hating yourself is so luxe, only Americans find time to do it." I'm wearing your too small sandals, looking for bones you must have left. I'm talking to the ladder, the moon vine, the status of someone's nose, the echo of your cackle, and the study behind the gold crucifix whose head toppled off, stayed lost, the gamut. I am losing this wanton mind near the dogwood where I lost my punk Barbie, just before the bed where I abandoned a virgin tongue when she ran out of stories worth reading. I'm still reading myself into things, including gunshots, glaucoma. My family says I'm the frostbite no one believes in a desert. On a planet with no map to hold me, I'm still waxing my legs with wine and laughing and before crying wins out, like you showed me. I'm still strolling the hairballed rugs of your hallway, running recon with the armored commas of family portraits. I pause to kiss the semicolon aunts, to lick the babas, to icon the drunkest uncles. I miss the land your arms made me. I can't quit looking, flexing the myth's little muscles, as if to ask, what follows from absence? And how, Mamika? How? Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to introduce Shannon tonight. And it's been an honor to read. So I feel like this bio that I'm about to read actually doesn't give you as big a picture of Shannon as you deserve, but I'm going to read it anyway. Shannon K. Winston's book, The Girl Who Talked to Paintings from Glasslyre Press, was published in 2021. Her individual poems have appeared in Rhino Poetry, West Trestle Review, The Shore, and elsewhere. She holds an MFA from the Warren Wilson Program for Writers and a PhD in Comparative Literature from the University of Michigan, and she is amazing. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure to be here and to be reading with you all. So many fantastic lines, so many wonderful poems. So I'm going to be reading from my collection, The Girl Who Talked to Paintings. And as you may guess, many of the poems, but not all, are ekphrastic. That is, they're inspired by works of art. And the first poem I'm going to read is called Ways to View Jean Miraut's Triptych Blue, 1, 2, 3. Start with the left and you'll see rain on a windshield after a storm. Begin with the right and you'll see only a kite string drifting against the sky. There are 1,000 ways to begin a story. With the middle, perhaps, is best. With a red sewing needle stitching up black holes. Or maybe they aren't holes, but pebbles skimming the water seconds before they sink. There are also a million ways to interpret a story. The way I took my lover's silence for indifference. The way she thought my idle chatter was irreverence. The way I sometimes thought my sneaking to her house in the middle of the night was so lonely. Our secret rendezvous collecting like black dots against a blue canvas. But then again, how lovely the snow fell all around me as I trekked back and forth between her house and mine at midnight. The sidewalk appeared like black ovals beneath my feet where the snow had melted. These tiny openings. How easy silence seemed, chosen, not imposed. Like something I could lean into, like a simple red sliver, a blot of paint. To embroider, decorate, to strip back, cut. Yes, maybe this is the best way in. So I writing this collection was inspired by my own shyness and kind of thinking about the imaginary friends I had as a child and thinking, well, what if someone, instead of having imaginary friends, had imaginary friends in artwork or could talk to paintings, hence the title of my collection. And different forms of silences are thematized throughout, and in this following poem as well, which is called Self-Portrait in White, while viewing Salvador Dali's figure at a window. Like me, Dali hid his grievances in the hem of a girl's dress, and the thick blue stripes running down her back. In art, they call mistakes or amendments mid-stroke pentimento. I call them silence. 9 years old, I'm sitting by my father on the front porch, watching lightning slice the sky. We've run out of things to say. Me, his greatest regret, a daughter, not a son. Him, mine, a father I could no longer talk to. If grief were a color, it would be white, I'm sure of it. The girl in the painting leans against the windowsill. What was she thinking? The window opens onto the Mediterranean, a sailboat and mountains. In the glass pane, I glimpsed the reflection of a small white house in the distance. If only I could step through the canvas, climb out the window and over waves to this threshold. I would turn the brass doorknob and feel my way through this strange, yet not altogether unfamiliar space as my father recedes into the background. I would call the girl sister, this place my home. So I, in addition to kind of grappling with different artworks, I also had a lot of fun thinking about language and how to make lots of word puns. I'm a huge punster, and so you can pick up on that in the next poem that's called Word Games and Space Travel. And it's inspired by a painting by Michael Thompson called Girl with a Hole in Her Stocking. A hesitation, a hole, a rip. Sometimes my thoughts proceed like this, like a teasing at the seams where one thread loosens, then another, only to contract elsewhere. The way I think splinter, then sister. Oh, the association games she and I played to pass the time. Fall, she'd say. Trampoline, I'd reply. Corkscrew, curls. Syllables stitched up the hours. Almond, eye, telescope, what do you see? A blue earring lost in the baseboards. Through our games, it morphed into a blueberry, a raindrop, a lake big enough to swim in. What do you feel? Felt, cloth, velvet. My tongue explored each word, probing the space between letters. Space, a blank. To space, to forget. Outer space. Me and my sister, two astronauts tasked with discovering dark matter, Big Dipper's, Orion's belt. All of it hidden in a C or an O, galaxies nestled in unsuspecting letters. Even now, my fingers pick at snags in my nylons and pull, unravel, gravel, travel, to glimpse what lies beneath, behind, beyond. So As you can maybe tell, kind of speech and language is central to the collection. I spent a lot of time living in France and in Italy, and I also, which was an interesting experience for me, learning new languages because I had a fairly big speech impediment. And one of the letters I couldn't say was the letter S, right? That starts my name. And so that this has inspired the following poem. And the title is fairly long and it runs into the poem. It's called, "When the speech therapist told me to say the letter S, I opened my mouth. When the speech therapist told me to say the letter S, I opened my mouth and nothing. I tried again, nothing, nothing. A thorn wedged between my teeth, beauty's sharpest edge. I've always fumbled over the most basic tasks. Again and again, my tongue rubbed until it bled. Try to say your name, she urged. Say anything." I'll read one more poem. And this is the penultimate poem in the collection, and it is called Palindromes. And the only thing you need to know about this poem is that there is some French in here. Palindromes. Out on the Port Townsend ferry, I watched seagulls rise, then dip along the horizon. Two men warred over chess as a girl twirled in a blue polka-dotted dress. A woman in a sun hat skimmed a book with pages so thin I thought I could see right through them, could see each letter reflecting back at me in the salt water in the midday sun. Saw spelled backwards is was. Noon spelled backwards is noon. Some things are harder to name. My love, what I never dared call my lover, who I kissed behind the azaleas in the park. Fumbling through her blouse, I touched the fault line just north of a north, past the seesaw and monkey bars where desire resides. Chair in French means flesh. Fear inverted is nonsense. But level spelled backwards is level. Dust unfolded at eye level as we touched. Her skin was wet with dew and shadows of upturned leaves. Boat-shaped, they slid over us, casting silhouettes in the tenderest spots, between joint, muscle, bone. Une reprise, amend. Again and again, our hands searched out loss and gave it sails, then watched it drift from view. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shannon. Oh, I am listed as Annie here. But thank you all so much for sharing those poems this evening. That was really lovely. Poetry readings are some of my favorite events to do. It's always just such a treat. And anybody watching, if you have any questions for any of these wonderful poets, put them in the comments. We will get to them. But first, I was kind of wondering throughout this, Chloe, you mentioned this at the beginning. We were chatting and you mentioned your revision process of like picking which poems you were going to read. And so I was hoping that we could kind of go around, and I wanted to hear just like, how do you pick which poems from your collections to read at events? Why'd you pick the ones you read tonight? Maybe Shannon, let's start with you and then we can just go around the circle.
Sure. So we started with the first poem in the collection and ended with the last one. And I think to kind of give a sense of the arc, but questions of language and visual art and how my different speakers can or cannot express themselves are central themes. So I tried to pick both visual art poems and language poems to give a sense of the collection.
Jessica, how about you?
This is terrible, but mainly I read the same poems, and it's mainly this book. It feels really raw to me, and this week I feel so vulnerable. And before the reading, I thought about changing too, and I just if I know what I'm going to read, I feel like I have control over the language because they feel kind of raw to me and intense. And I there's like a couple poems in the book I've never read aloud. So I'm just hoping that over time I can get to those. And I always read the poems that I like the most, usually. So
Yeah, thanks. Chloe.
I really love that question. I've never been asked that, and it's neat to hear how everybody picks their poems. I choose mine in a totally chaotic way. As I was saying right before the reading, I like make some sort of a plan, and then 5 minutes before the reading, I usually throw it up in the air and pick different things. But I would say I'm usually trying to give sort of a sense of the range of the book I'm reading from. I would say, like Jessica, I maybe have an ear to what poems I'm gonna feel up for reading or not. If I'm feeling a little more tender, there are poems I'm gonna avoid. I've been in the position of like reading a poem that has like made me get, verklempt in the middle of the poem, and that feels really embarrassing. And like, I don't want to say I'm like making myself cry in my poems. It feels weird. And so maybe there are those poems that I might sometimes avoid, or sometimes be like, I feel that I want to share that poem with people, and it feels good to do that. Yeah, and also maybe certainly there are certain poems that I read a lot at readings because I feel like they're reading friendly. They're like, sometimes I'll read like a comical poem or a poem that has kind of good kind of musical aspects. But today I kind of picked strange ones, I think, because I just gave a reading and I wanted to read different ones. So these are not the poems I usually pick, but they were fun to read. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, thank you. Alina, how about you?
I do very much like Chloe, sort of last minute chaos. And my husband has asked me before, why don't you have some sort of a method so that you don't have this right before reading every time? But if I do pick poems before, I change them at the last minute, and I've even gone so far as to print them and create a set list, and found myself in a room and felt just wanting to read something completely different. I don't know why I read the ones I read tonight. I just marked pages and read them, and I always afterwards feel like I should have read other ones. So I don't know if that's helpful at all. I need a method, I think.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you guys all. We do have one question in from the audience, which I'm actually also very interested to hear from you guys about. Leslie G asks, what poetry collections or poems do you return to again and again? So you can sit with that for a second, but Shannon, whenever you're ready, I think you're up first, unless anybody else has an answer right off the top of their heads.
It's such a hard question because I think that depends on my mood and maybe what I need in the moment. And but I would say I really admire poets who make associative leaps and who are really brave on the page. And just anecdotally, when I started writing my acrostic poems, I started writing descriptions of the paintings and kind of stopping there. And so people kept on asking me, well, the paintings already exist, right? So we don't need, I mean, your description is okay and fine, but what are you adding to the artwork? And so I needed to be a little braver, I guess I would say. And so I really turned to C.D. Wright. And I just, all of her collections are so inspiring in terms of both the content and the form and the way that she puts bravery onto the page. So there are many others, but that's what comes to mind right now.
Thank you. Yeah. Jessica, how about you?
You know, This is my third book, and each of my books I associate with certain poets because those were the books that I was obsessed with at the time. And then I never lose the love for those poets, but I definitely have poets that I think of during certain decades, like during my 20s. It was Ruth Stone and Louise Glick, which I may have pronounced her name wrong, because I never say things aloud. I don't talk to poets enough, so I mispronounce so many words. And it's funny because I'm afraid to say the poets I was deeply influenced by for this book because I don't sound anything like them. I went back and reread a lot of C.D. I remember when I wrote the first poem for Liar, I was rereading one with others, C.D. Wright also. And then two of the poems in this book, Diane Seuss's ekphrastic book, the four-legged, I'm forgetting the title. I read that book in like a mad fury. And I wrote two poems, like almost whole from that book. And so I think, I don't know if I'm answering what you asked, but I feel like when I'm writing something, I gravitate towards a certain kind of energy. Poets that are, I think Shannon said this, that take great risks. And I always reread Anne Carson over and over and over. Autobiography of Red is one of my favorite books. And Lucy Brock-Broido's, I love all her books, but I've read A Hunger like 9 times. And then I just like to reread Gwendolyn Brooks and Rilke just for comfort. I don't know why. I find Gwendolyn Brooks really soothing and centering. And I wish a collected Gwendolyn Brooks would come out at some point. So.
Amazing. Thank you. Chloe, how about you?
Yeah, this is such a hard question to answer, and it sort of like makes my mind go blank a little bit because there's so many people that I would want to name. I think I have 2 categories of poems or books that I come back to. I have poems that I memorized. I've memorized poems like since I was a kid, and I have that little archive, and they're not like new hip poems. They're like Robert Frost and Gerard Manley Hopkins and Shakespeare, and like I have those poems are the ones that the real truth is those are what I come back to the most because they are literally like they're part of my body. And they're what I think of if I can't fall asleep or if I'm stressed out or if I need to clear my head from something else. I have them and I can pull them up. So I always want to say to people, memorize poems, do it. Even if you can memorize just one, and then once you memorize one, you'll want to memorize 12. But books that I've been coming back to recently, I would say are books that I keep putting on my syllabi when I'm teaching because I love reading them in a classroom with students. So we were just talking before the reading about the new Ross Gay book, Beholding, which is a book-length poem. That's a book that I now have read like many, many times for teaching, and each time I read it, it has something new. And I would say, you know, it's a book that I come back to because it's full of things that I feel like I can't do. And I read it and I'm like, how did that happen? How did he make this shift from one scene to another, from one gesture to another? And I didn't even see it happen. So it's an interesting book to me because I keep going back to it to try and investigate, like, how was it made? What is it made of? Why does it work so well? And another one that I am teaching right now that I come back to often is Mary Shebist. And also, I don't know if I'm mispronouncing her name, her book Incarnadine, which kind of like investigates the myth of Mary, the story of Mary from the Bible, and uses it to think about women and women's bodies and how stories and myths about women kind of shape our experience. Maybe that would be one really simplistic way to summarize what's a beautiful, gorgeous book. But that book is interesting to me because of the way she uses visual forms, and she really plays around with forms in ways that inspire me and in ways that I have come back to often when I'm stuck writing and think I can't think of what I want to do or how to make myself surprised again. That's a book that I'll go back to and say, oh, she really wrote a book like in the shape of, the lines are coming out like a starburst shape and you have to turn your head around to read it. And it's just wild to do something that forces you to use your body when you're reading a poem. So that's another book I come back to a lot because it's full of juicy stuff like that inspires me.
Thank you. Alina, how about you?
As everyone said, this is just the hardest question because it just so much depends on a time in life. If I think of poets that I cannot imagine the world without, I would have to say Mahmoud Darwish would be one of them. I don't think that my world and the way that I think of the line or the way that I even think of nation states, of borders, of time, of place, of lament would exist in the same way without him. And that applies to the elegy as well, or to the elegiac form. I think that there's a way in which the exile self-elegizes and elegizes a self in time or a placed self. So that is one poet that is huge to me. Mary Ruefle, I just love. I've always just loved her. And so I would add her. Audre Lorde, I'm not sure the world would also another writer that has influenced the way I understood the line and heard the line. But a lot of the poets that I am sort of obsessed with are poets that have been translated. Darwish is one of them. And so I can't think of one collection because one thing I've really enjoyed is, for example, with Thomas Salamun, how the differences in the translations, like each, one collection will be these poems by one translator, and then reading them in another translation, it's just like a whole new vista and a whole new rubbing of a certain verb and proximity to a certain sort of tonal relationship. And that has blown my mind in recent years. My respect for translators is huge, and my love for their creativity is huge and for what they bring us. And so love so many poets, but those are just a few off the top of my head.
Thank you. Yes, and for those who can't see, maybe those viewing on Facebook, if you go to our YouTube channel, Adrienne Crezo just did the wonderful work of collating a whole list of the poets that were just mentioned. So if you want to go back and search for their collections, it is in the YouTube comments. All right, we are kind of winding down here, only a few minutes left. But I was hoping to get, if everyone could get like just a little bit in about the creative process of the main, like the collection that they read from tonight. What was inception like? How long did it take? Many of you talked about your inspirations for the collections, but just kind of how is this collection born? What's its birth story into the world?
I'll start. So briefly, I started writing random poems about paintings I loved because I should say I've always wanted to be a painter, but have zero visual talent. So it was sort of like, okay, if I could be a visual artist. And I would say that I'm really interested in form, and I took an amazing workshop with Diane Seuss at the Frost Place and started thinking about sonnets and shaping my poems. I have list poems, sonnets, and so I think that it was really, and I have a poem that kind of imitates a Joseph Cornell artwork. And so it was really when I started thinking not only about the content of my collection, but the different forms of individual poems. That's when things started getting like super fun for me and kind of came together. So
Thank you, Jessica.
This book actually started, I had intended to write an entire book about from student misspellings that I had been collecting for like 5 years that my colleagues would bring to me. And it was not to make fun of the misspellings. They were like deeply pleasurable. I would like read them on my desk. And part of that, the book still retains spread throughout a series of misspelling poems, which I don't tend to read because I'm not sure how to I've read a few of them before, but I don't know how to translate that in a reading. But I think because this book, for me, part of this book, it's a book that relies heavily on silence, muteness, and image, everything that is internal, because so much of it is the interior of childhood and just the interior of not speaking. And then other poems just started to emerge and I let them emerge. But it began, I had like 100, I wrote 100 poems that were from misspellings, and most of them didn't make it into the book. And yeah, it was just the joy of, the initial joy of the misspellings was the way that you had to take time to apprehend what the word was, and it was like that pleasure of a pun when you get it, you get the doubleness, but it was actually like a word a child had used, although some of these kids were like 17, 18, misspelling, like seniors, SENYURS. So that's enough. We don't want to talk too much. That was the beginning of the book. And then it went many other places. So
Yeah, that's incredible. I love the idea of just having a stack of misspellings on your desk. That does seem like just such a joyous little
and I used to sleep with them too. Like I had them in an envelope on little slips of paper.
No.
And my colleagues don't know that I wrote a book about this, but they knew that I loved them. So they still bring them to me, and I still get texts on the phone, and I'm like, oh, this one would be so great. So,
that's awesome. Thank you. Chloe, how about you?
Jessica, I love that became like a collaborative project, like everybody gathering the misspellings. That's really neat. My book kind of evolved over, I don't know, like more than a decade. I did an MFA and another, and I was in a PhD program, and I was sort of trying to write poems all through that, and having kids and moving around the country for jobs all the time. And there was kind of like chaos in my life, and I wasn't able to put the poems together into some kind of a sequence or a pattern or think about what they meant as a group for a very long time. And then I finally moved to Claremont, where, apologies, it's getting dark here. I'm outside in Southern California. And finally, like after we moved here and I had my second daughter, I began to be able to like see a shape of a book happening. And I also, at that point, I think gave up all of my resistance to writing poems about motherhood, writing lots of stuff about gender, writing poems that were funny, writing poems that kind of drew on my experience in India and my other job, which is being a scholar and teaching courses on religion. So all of these things that I think for a long time I tried to keep like separate, like those don't belong in poems, those don't belong in poems. This book happened when I let all the mess into one space. And even then, it took me a long time. I was sending this book out and revising it and reshaping it for probably 3 years before it finally was published. I'm going to stop because it's getting so dark where I am, but I just want to say thank you so much, Steph, for hosting. Thank you to Jessica for organizing this, and thank you to Shannon and Alina and Jessica for your brilliant readings. It's really a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Yeah, Alina, if you want to get a little bit of last word in.
Yep, I was just going to say, Dor started off one way. It started off as an attempt to define this word after Mom died. And then I took the manuscript and burnt all of it in the backyard, as my husband would say, like a poet had this big old backyard burn and big dramatic goodbye, and I'm not writing any of this, and forget it because I can't write it. And then I put the ashes next to my mom's urn on the bookshelf and just kept going, and then came back to it. And when I came back to it with a lot of uncertainty, but with the memory of my parents after the wall fell and the dictatorship in Romania fell in many ways, and them crying and hugging each other and looking in the news and saying, we never should have left. If we had known, we never should have left. And that was the first time in my life that I had imagined having family, having my aunt, being whole, existing in the same language and the same stories, and not hiding oneself. And I was kind of broken by it. Like, I had never realized that you could be whole. And so they took us out of school and took us to Romania. And after my mom's death, that moment happened again in some ways, because I'm married to an American who doesn't speak Romanian. And we don't have a big there's no Romanian community in Birmingham. And this sort of anguish at losing, language, at fighting to keep to have your children speak a language that they're like, nobody speaks that. We don't want to speak Romanian. Ew, I'll speak French, that everyone wants to speak French or like and so there's just this grief, this deep grief that brought me back, I guess, not trying to define, but trying to sort of unravel. That's how Dor happened, I guess. A lot of failure. And thank you all so much. I mean, so much. It's such an honor to be here.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and we are just about out of time. So I want to say thank you not only to these beautiful poets for sharing their work with us tonight, but for everybody who tuned in and commented and, just shared this space with us. It was such a lovely way to spend an evening. Again, if you want to buy any of the collections that were read from tonight, the link to our website is in the comments section, as well as our phone number. Give us a call. We're happy to ship anywhere. We ship internationally as well as within the United States, obviously. So support these wonderful artists. If you guys have any last words you want to say, I'll hand it over to you. Otherwise, have a lovely night, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. This was a delight and a pleasure.
Yeah, I loved it. Thank you for reading with me. It was so nice. It's the best highlight of the week.
Thank you all for being here on a crazy night. Thank you.
And thank you, Majors and Quinn Bookstore. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure. All right.
Thank you for
Have
having
a great
us.
night.
Bye,
Bye, everybody.
everyone.